there's no evidence that more of any of that makes you happier.
The Phil Bach Podcast. Investing, economics, entrepreneurship.
Welcome back to the Phil Bach Podcast. It is a frosty morning here just outside Detroit, Michigan, and our guest this week is right across Lake Michigan from Chicago, the incomparable Brian Portnoy. Brian is the founder at Shaping Wealth. He's the author of Geometry of Wealth. He's the author of The Investor's Paradox, and he's the editor of a new book, How I Invest My Money, a compilation of essays from thought leaders in the investment world about how they invest their money. So we're going to talk financial education. We're going to talk behavioral investing. We're going to talk about Brian's philosophy of funded contentment and more. Brian, thank you for joining the show.
Phil, it's great to be here. Thank you.
All right. So I want to start here with your most recent book, How I Invest My Money, which you edited along with Josh Brown. And it's a compilation of essays from, financial thought leaders and experts about how they invest their money. And you, of course, have an essay as well about how you invest your money. And in it, you talk about how your parents rarely talked about money at home. And it seems like, in this world, like all the taboos are coming down. It used to be never discuss politics or religion. You go on Twitter and, it's clearly not the consensus view anymore. But money does seem to be one of the last taboos left. And, do you think that the fact that money is a taboo and people do not talk about it, has that contributed to the lack of awareness and the lack of financial education around personal finances and investing?
100% yes. Money is a topic that is connected on multiple levels to our sense of identity, our values, who we are and who we want to be. It's raw. And it's also, to state the painfully obvious, it's how we keep the house warm and put food on the table. So it's this big multidimensional topic that we're just not comfortable getting into. And as a result, the type of education that would be necessary to make us better equipped to have those conversations doesn't happen. It's a vicious cycle. I mean, if you draw the analogy between physical fitness and financial fitness, on the physical fitness side, it doesn't seem taboo to talk about maybe eating less, working out more, all that basic stuff. Not true on the financial front, where it just generally feels totally uncomfortable.
Right. It does. And, I think it's kind of interesting, further in your post, you break down your investment approach and you have 4 categories, including, one that you call juicy cash, which is, cash, but you're trying to enhance it as best you can. But then you've got other things that are so much more fun, right? You've got long-term options, enterprise income, and I'll let you define them. But, I also wanted to ask, is it tempting? Is it hard, especially when the market is so hot and there's so much, fascinating news and everything going on in the market? Is it hard to keep those buckets, not to transfer money from those buckets that are more, that are the safer long-term buckets into the more exciting buckets?
It's a timely question. The answer is, I guess a little bit, but the buckets are there for a reason. I put in this framework. It's, let's be clear, I completely made this up. It doesn't map to anything else in finance or investing. It's just the way I think about the money in our family portfolio. And I often say that in life, we paint the bullseye after the arrow's been shot. And so these 4 categories, which I'll touch on in a moment, just kind of reflect me looking at what we have and had and realizing, okay, this is sort of a clever, hopefully not too clever, little mental model for just putting everything in a certain bucket. With free beta, that is what it is. I have a long career in manager selection and portfolio management, and I have at this point a very, very dim view on the ability of active managers to add value in big public markets. So, a vast majority of our, retirement assets and some other investments are in VT, the Vanguard Global Total Stock Market ETF index thing. I don't know what it's called, but it's like 5 basis points, and it gives us global stock market exposure. Juicy cash is just as you referenced, we need cash, because my human capital and financial capital are closely correlated. And I think this is true of many people in our profession. I tend to hold more cash than models would suggest. But the extension of that is that I have tried to find one-off opportunities, such as in the municipal bond market, where instead of making 0.1%, I could make 1%, 2%, 3%, 4% on cash. Enterprise income is, rental properties, things we've been able, after, my wife and I have had long careers, able to buy some things that generate current income, which is a nice feeling.
Like, what are some examples of that?
Well, we own a couple homes that we rent out to others. As simple as us, we're landlords. Not sexy, but
not sexy, but tried and true.
Yeah, about as tried and true. Yeah, being a landlord is about as tried and true as it comes. And then, long-term options / lottery tickets, that's venture, that's angel, that's the fun stuff. There's sort of none of this is modeled per se, but each of those could be a zero. And those are kind of just pretty random venture investments all over the world in different sorts of opportunities. These have come to me, you and I have been in the industry for a long time. At a certain point, you're just sort of in a cohort where it's like, oh, hey, you want to invest in my Sri Lankan chocolate factory? And the answer is probably no. But over time, you meet people and you sort of see some things, and every now and then something's interesting. So you put in a little bit of money knowing that it could be a zero or it could be a 10x.
Yeah. And like I said, that's kind of the fun stuff, right? That's the stuff that you really, and so is that a difficult discipline, especially now when venture is so hot and the market is so hot? Is that difficult to be like, how tempted are you to take money from Juicy Cash and, you hear the next Sri Lankan chocolate factory, but this one's a good one, right? And you're excited about it and you think it's going to be a 100xer, right? How do you keep that discipline and keep the money on the sidelines?
Yeah. And we talked about this for a moment before we started recording. I don't get too wrapped up in the markets. In the book, How I Invest My Money, Christine Benz, who was, funny enough, my first boss at Morningstar back in 2000. So we were old friends, and I just respect the heck out of her. She says something in the book that resonated with me, which is that she simply doesn't find investing interesting, which is kind of a bizarre thing to say out loud if you think about who's saying it. I mean, she's the head of personal finance for Morningstar, and I've been kind of an investment manager of sorts for more than 20 years now. But the fun of investing, the game of it all, it simply does not appeal to me. I mean, honestly, there's here in my home office, I've got hundreds of unread books. I'd much rather focus on that. Yes, these are heady times. The GameStop stuff that we just saw and might be picking up again. Frankly, I think that stuff's ridiculous and dangerous and kind of sad. I guess it's fine that people can go to a new form of casino and gamble and probably lose, but that simply doesn't appeal to me. And to maybe dig an inch deep, number one, on the venture side, I've had some zeros and I frickin' hate that. So I've already seen that, like, I can lose it all. And it just really bothers me. And I guess it's not secondly, it'd be 1B. Like, if I think about loss aversion, because I'm into behavioral finance, something I write about and coach, and loss aversion is simply the idea that losses are more painful than gains are pleasurable. And, like the standard psychologist ratio set by psychologists is like 2.5 to 1. I think I'm like 8 to 1. I go to a casino every now and then with friends over the years. If I make a few $100, I couldn't care less. If I lose like $100, I'm miserable. So I sort of know who I am.
That's great. And it's great to have a disciplined approach. Obviously that's, the most important thing. I think, the most important thing to determine long-term success in investing is to have a framework that you stick to. And the interesting about the book was the diversity of frameworks, the way so many different people who are all experts, but they all thought differently and they all had a different approach to how they invest. As you went through the book and you worked with the different contributors, what were some of the approaches that really surprised you?
I wouldn't say anyone let me put it this way. I thought there were some incredibly powerful insights about how people manage their money lives, broadly defined, because the book's about more than just investing. It's about saving and spending and borrowing and charitable giving. I was delighted with the diversity of experiences that people communicated, contributors communicated. I don't think there was a moment where I thought to myself, oh, geez, I never would have possibly thought of that, or, oh, I would have done 180-degree different. From a thematic point of view. We asked, it was me and Josh, and we asked 23 others to write these chapters. And what we got back were not detailed portfolios or spreadsheets. We basically got 23 stories. People talking about their immigrant grandparents, talking about themselves growing up in poverty, talking about growing up in comfort, but then kind of figuring out what they wanted their career to be. So no surprises, but incredible diversity of experience. And these are all, as you point out, these are all people who for a living manage other people's money. And I think there's something very telling in the fact that no one did it in the exact same way as the next.
Yeah, that is telling, and that is interesting. And the other thing that really struck me going through the book is how connected everyone's philosophies were, how true they were to their personality. I think in a long enough time frame, people are going to invest to their personality. And that means that some people are, content to have, to just be in passive. And I think, that often those will match their personalities. And then you have these extreme cases like Perth Toll had a wonderful essay in the book where she talked about, the importance of freedom as a, in terms of, the bigger picture freedom, having grown up in communist China and now being here in the US, and how she invests that way. She believes that is, a factor that allows the companies that you invest in to flourish and invest that way. And I just love the idea that you have all these smart, interesting, diverse people that are contributing to how they invest. And when you think about it, and if you know them, the way they invest very often matches their true character. And I just thought it was a very interesting thing to observe.
Yeah, thanks. I'd put a pin in it by just saying that money is an expression of your identity. And everyone, Perth is awesome, as many people know, and what she's built is really impressive and very much an expression of what she fundamentally believes about how the world should work. I'm sure you recall Bob Seawright's chapter, which was entirely about a lake house. Had nothing to do with his portfolio or anything like that, but the fact that there's this house that's been in his family for a few generations and what it means to own that, and the fact that the house as an investment per se is terrible. It's not winterized, it's falling apart, but it's also like the epicenter of the love between grandparents and children, adult children and grandkids. It's awesome.
So, Brian, the first time that we connected was when I was working on a project called Detroit Invest in You, which was a partnership with Tyrone Ross to bring financial education into Detroit. This project's been put on hold for funding issues, but it's not dead, and we're still hoping to revive it. But what was interesting, when you called me, you had been very involved for much of your entire career in financial education, something you feel really passionate about. It feels like and this is, one of the reasons why I got involved in this issue or hope to get more involved in the future, is the most educational resources are available to people who have the most money, right? The way our industry works in wealth management and asset management is typically that you pay a fee tied to the assets under management that you have. So the more money you have, the more fees you're paying, but also the more resources you have. In other words, a family office will have a team of analysts, and an ultra high net worth investor will have, the best resources from the best financial institutions, but somebody who's poor that doesn't have any savings is not a valuable client to a financial advisor, and thus very rarely has any resources available to them at all. I know this is something that you feel very passionately about. So, tell me about, how you've been involved in this space, what you've done to try to correct this, and what do you think should be done going forward to close that gap?
Yeah, it's such an important topic. From a mile high view, really the two things I enjoy doing in life are learning and teaching. And so, that's been my commitment in a variety of different seats over the last nearly 30 years. So financial literacy checks a really big box for me in terms of the opportunity to share important ideas with people who need them. coming back to the very first point we covered, like it's such a difficult topic. Very few people are qualified to teach financial literacy or financial education. And probably the most interesting observation I've had over the last couple years, especially in our sort of Twitter world, in our FinTwit world, is that there seem to be countless initiatives for financial literacy all over the place. There's little ones in towns that are just one-off things, and then there's big national organizations. So it's not for lack of trying. Our friend Tyrone Ross talks a lot about access, and that might be the most important word I've heard in this conversation over the last year or two. We have to continue to find ways to give access to this knowledge about basic financial literacy to all communities, and especially the ones that aren't heavily resourced. I mean, you live in Detroit. I live in Chicago, not in the suburbs, live in the city of Chicago. So we see firsthand there's plenty of need. I've been involved with the University of Chicago Financial Education Initiative. Is that what it's called? Yeah, literacy education. Yeah, sometimes I flip those. But University of Chicago has just the crackerjack staff of education professionals who have built a curriculum and a framework to help people learn from where they are. So you can be somebody on the Southwest side, or you could be somebody up on the North Shore. So in Chicago terms, you could be very poor or very rich. And the framework that they've built, that I've been kind of thrilled to be associated with to some extent, allows someone to think about these issues of like who's in your orbit, who do you talk to money about, who's got what responsibilities, before you get into the quantitative stuff, the budgeting and the spreadsheets and all that. There's sort of a sociological and a psychological element to this that has to be addressed. And Chicago is not the only group that's doing this. There's plenty of great efforts out there. But I think coming to people where they are, and I don't mean physically showing up, I mean understanding where they're coming from, culturally, socially, psychologically, is critically important. We know that just the rendering of facts and equations are completely ineffective in almost every walk of life, and certainly in a topic as sensitive as money.
All right, let's talk about funded contentment. In the book, Geometry of Wealth, you distinguish between being content and happy, and you talk about the concept of funded contentment as a way to, I guess, measure wealth. Tell me about that concept. What was the genesis for that idea, and how should people think about it in the context of their goals in terms of wealth accumulation?
Yeah. So, I had written a prior book called The Investor's Paradox, which was about, making good investments and managing portfolios skillfully. And by the end of that exercise in 2013, 2014, it sort of just occurred to me, whether the question of who cares just kept coming up in my mind. And it's not a novel insight to say that our industry is just focused on the accumulation of more, but that doesn't map up a lot of the time to what makes for a good life. So the geometry of wealth generally, and the concept of funded contentment specifically, was designed to sort of create a space to transcend the quest for more and think about a deeper form of happiness, being comfortable with enough. The fork in the road that I draw on page 2 or page 3 is between being rich and being wealthy. Being rich is the accumulation of more. And, we have a psychological tendency called hedonic adaptation, which is a clumsy way of saying we just grow used to everything in life, both good and bad. And so when we accumulate more money and the things that money buys, fame, beauty, just the regular stuff of day-to-day society, there's no evidence that more of any of that makes you happier. The other fork is toward wealthy, and I define that as the ability to underwrite a meaningful life. And my shorthand for that is funded contentment. And what I try to do in book 2, which I sort of half joke as a prequel to book 1, it's sort of a bit of a shout out to my Star Wars obsessions. But the prequel tries to ask the deeper question, the right question first, which is, what is meaningful to you? Before you figure out about, okay, I'm going to invest in GameStop or Bitcoin, or I'm going to buy a cheap diversified index fund that's going to grow hopefully steadily over time. But before you get to those tactical questions, explore not just strategy, but philosophical questions as to what are you doing? What makes you happy? What's a meaningful life? The big stuff, the things we've been debating as humankind for millennia. And so the funded contentment concept is just that. You focus on the contentment piece first, and then ask the question, what does a meaningful life cost? Can I afford a meaningful life? I think these are very awkward and uncomfortable questions to ask, and I try to make it slightly less awkward, more comfortable by the framework that I developed.
And I think you did that. I think you did that very, very well. I mean, the beauty in your books is your ability to take these complex concepts and create like visualizations of them so you can see them. And that is throughout the geometry of wealth. There's also in the investor's paradox where, you dive into the world of fund manager selection and how to navigate the world of asset managers in a time where there's an overwhelming amount of choices for investors to sift through when it comes to funds and strategies and asset managers. For financial advisors, what is a winning framework that they can use, that they could put together to run an investment program where they're not making arbitrary decisions based on last quarter's performance or based on which wholesaler happened to walk through the door?
Well, I'll give you what sounds like the right answer and then tell you why it's at best a partial answer. The quote unquote right answer is goals-based wealth management, meaning don't worry about beating the market, a completely arbitrary, kind of silly thing to try to do. It doesn't mean anything. So instead, focus on the things that you want to achieve. And, we all mostly live by the same script. Nice home, kids in college, retirement is the big, the big goal that we all share in to some extent. And, so those four goofy buckets that I had before, the free beta, the juicy cash, the enterprise income, and the lottery tickets, those are, when you disaggregate what's in them, those are actually all tied to specific things that Tracy and I would like to do as a family. So I've got 3 teenage kids, and, we've promised each of them 4 years of college, no more than that, but they each get 4 years on us. We'd like to retire someday, whatever that means. And so having those goals is the critical piece. It sounds pretty straightforward and obvious because in some ways it is, but let's also appreciate, and Phil, this really well, this isn't where our industry was for most of its history. I mean, it's mostly a brokerage business, an investing business, comprehensive planning and goals-based wealth management. These have popped up in the last 10, 15 years, or if not popped up, they've only really accelerated from a small base since maybe the turn of the century and certainly after the GFC. So, it's a big, big box to check, which is to sort of transcend the quest for more or being rich and tie yourself to goals. The reason that this is only a partially correct answer, now to contradict myself, is that there's another level that I call purpose-based wealth management, which I think is more profound, more important, and to some extent easier to achieve, because the goals themselves are sort of tied up to specific numbers, and you hit those numbers or you don't in terms of paying for college or retiring or whatever. But what I've realized in the coaching work that I do, in the company that I run, the speeches that I've given over the years, and many speeches, many consultations, is that not just clients, but the advisors themselves want to think about the deeper things in life that are important to them. And those aren't captured in goals per se. So when you say I want to retire at age 65 with $2 million and then have a 4% withdrawal strategy, okay, that's fine. What does that even mean? It doesn't begin to tell us what you really want, who you really are. And so this purpose-based wealth management, one that takes into account funded contentment, I have found it to be far more robust and a very welcome message from a lot of people.
Let's talk about your newest venture, Shaping Wealth. What was the genesis of the idea, and what are you hoping to accomplish with the company?
So, as the name implies, Shaping Wealth, it's an idea that stemmed from what I wrote in The Geometry of Wealth. And the idea, let me put it this way. That book came out a few years ago, and it was on the back of almost 5 years as the head of education and behavioral coaching for a mutual fund company. And over those years, I had I met thousands of financial advisors, a lot of one-on-one conversations, small groups, gave a lot of speeches, just a ton of interaction. And there was clearly a demand for the type of content that I was creating that went well beyond explaining, Q3 performance or, hey, what's going on with this Bitcoin thing? Like, yeah, that's interesting and people want to know about that. But there was certainly a significant demand for some of these deeper insights, how to understand them, and then how to teach them to their clients. So that was the genesis of the idea for the business that I'm in the process of building. It's still early days, but we are effectively an educational technology company that is helping people transform their experience with money. And one thing I realized, and sort of blinding flash of the obvious, at some point is that my time's not scalable, but my content is. So it's one thing to fly around and give speeches and talk to people, and that's totally fine. But I'd much rather try to communicate and institutionalize some of these insights on funded contentment, behavioral finance, behavioral coaching on a larger scale. So I've built a team of content creators who are using modern educational technology, learning management systems, and the like to create courses and journeys and different experiences on two levels. The first is coaching the coaches, basically advisor training and development. And the second is client engagement. Once the coaches have been coached, giving them a pretty big toolkit to have better conversations with their clients. And in some cases, we interact with the clients directly.
What's that like being a startup founder? I mean, you've worked with hedge funds. You've started your career, I believe, with Morningstar, right? But you've been an author. You've done all these different things, but you've never been a startup founder. What has that experience been like?
Terrifying. I mean, honestly, Phil, I haven't jumped out of bed excited to do my day's work for a long time. I had run my course in the asset management business a long time ago, but didn't have the courage to move on. Pretty good paychecks, stable existence, healthcare insurance. That's a nice thing to be able to go to the doctor. So here I am in the middle of a pandemic, starting a new company with a bit of an offbeat idea, and I love it. I mean, it is both terrifying and exhilarating on a daily basis. I really love the work. I love the ideas, and it's important, not just philosophically and emotionally, but commercially, that there seem to be a lot of financial planning firms out in the world, and we already have a handful of clients in a few different countries, but mainly focused in North America, that don't need much convincing that funded contentment, broadly defined, is something that they themselves want and they would like to deliver to their clients. And in a sense, they already are trying to do that. But I think that we are in the process of putting together a pretty unique and dazzling set of tools and perspectives that advisors and their clients are going to be able to use and have experiences that they haven't had otherwise. I'll also add that we're completely independent. We're conflict-free. So, for example, when I was, working at some investment firms over the last decade, I would sort of go to a windowless hotel ballroom and give a clever speech and get a few chuckles and, provide some insight. And that was all fine and good. But at the end of the day, I was there as a marketing trinket, and the wholesaler was selling a mutual fund or a hedge fund or something. And candidly, that's a shitty feeling. It's really not what I wanted to be doing. Shaping Wealth has no conflicts. We'll never sell any sort of products. I mean, my very crude formulation, which is probably terrible marketing, is cash for content. We feel that we've got a message and a method that's like really cool. And we would love to work with a handful of clients who want to go from good to great. We're not a company, which is, I think, 98, 99% of the industry, where, hey, we're going to provide a bunch of education and it's free. And it's free because we're selling you something else. And that doesn't denigrate the quality of the education that's being provided, but it does speak to, I think, the spirit of the effort and the value that's being added.
I mean, it sounds great. It sounds exciting. I can't wait to learn more about it. I know you're deep in the trenches of the early days, which is, the hardest, and you're head down and you're building. I got to say, you look a little tired, but that's good tired, right? That's the tired that you want. That's the tired that, that is tiring yet energizing. I mean, as much as that makes sense. So congratulations on getting launched.
Thank you.
So, Brian, I like to close with this question, which is, tell me about an obstacle that you've had either in your personal life or your career that you either found a way to work around or just persisted through.
Yeah, there's been a few. I mean, I wrote about it in How I Invest My Money. And so I'll just touch on it at a pretty high level because I don't want to get too far into it. But, I grew up in a pretty messed up family, not from an economic point of view, roof over the head, food on the table. But parents separated multiple times before they finally got divorced. And, I have one sibling who has special needs, and that made life complicated for everyone. My sister is someone I love more than anyone in the world and needs my help, and will need help for the rest of her life. And so, I mean, I'm 51, she's 49. We've been kind of together as brother and sister for forever. And you use the word obstacle. It's not an obstacle. It's just thinking about how I want to take care of her based on what she needs, but also what she deserves, is something that has defined my life. It's not the only thing. There's stuff with my wife and my kids and parents and step-parents and lots and lots of stuff. But that relationship has been very constitutive of my identity.
Well, that's a beautiful place to leave it off. And I think, your perseverance through that and everything else in life is, really shown. So congratulations on the startup and on the books and on all your success. Where can people find the books? Well, the books are available everywhere, but, where can people follow you and keep up with your work?
Yeah, so, the one bookstore in the world left is Amazon. If you can find them in your local bookstore, I prefer you buy them there, but that's a heartbeat these days. And then 2 digital spots for me. Our website, shapingwealth.com, has a little bit of information, not a lot. It's going to be revised in the months to come, but that's a good place to just take a quick look. And you can reach out to me through the site. And then, as you know, my sort of day-to-day office is on Twitter, and I'm at Brian Portnoy, and that's sort of where I hang out with like 83 of my closest friends every day.
And no relation to Dave Portnoy. The book is How I Invest My Money, and it's edited by Brian and Downtown Josh Brown. Brian, thank you again for joining the podcast. Thank you to the audience for your time and attention and your reviews on iTunes. Please keep them coming. They really help us. And we'll be back with a new show next week.
Thank you for listening to the Phil Bach Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment to drop a review. This show was published for entertainment purposes only and is not investment advice. Please contact a licensed professional before making any investments. Some of the securities discussed on the show may be owned by its participants. Opinions expressed on the show may not reflect those of their employers. Stay hungry and stay foolish.